time at the end of a day, before you transition into whatever happens for you after work, whether that's just some personal time, family time, what have you, what does it look like? What could it look like to reflect on that particular day? And in this case, what you might consider is just looking back through your tasks that you worked on, your conversations you had, maybe look at your calendar again if you live a lot by your calendar, and just kind of consider any observations you want to take away from the day. Hey friends, thanks for checking out another Built on Purpose video. I wanted to give you a quick disclaimer about this video you're about to see. When we did the recording, we had a sync issue with our audio and video on my camera, not on Laura's. So you're going to see that in the video. If it's a distraction, just kind of put it to the side and listen instead of watch. The content's still great, the audio still sounds nice and clear. There's no issue on that end. It's just a visual sync issue on my camera and microphone. We got it resolved for future videos, but it is caught in a few of the videos we have on our channel. So just wanted to give you that heads up. I will now let you get into this video.
Well, thanks for joining us today. We are going to take a little time to talk about the importance of reflection. Now, we're going to start out really strong with a quote from a classic 80s movie, one of my favorites, Ferris Bueller. I'm sure a lot of you have heard this quote before, but he says, "Life moves pretty fast. If you don't stop and look around once in a while, you could miss it." And it's really true. Now, obviously, this line kind of can tie well into the idea of like stop and smell the roses, things like that. But we're going to talk today about reflecting. And I think that that quote is pretty relevant when we think about taking the time to slow down and think about either your day or something you're reading or just a moment that you experience. I think it's really hard these days to get caught up in the motions because we get so busy, which it's kind of mind-blowing when you realize you truly have control over a lot of that. It just takes some focus and discipline, right? But anyhow, okay. So our tendency is, I don't know about you, we've talked about checklists before. I love a good checklist, but as soon as we check one thing off the list, we are on to the next one. You know, the pace of life is pretty crazy. And so if we don't have guardrails set into place to give ourselves margin for reflection, there's a lot of missed opportunities there. We have special moments we don't want to forget. We want to really take the time to soak in things that we're learning. So one thing that I was talking with a friend of mine the other day who is really passionate about taking care of her body. She loves the gym. We were talking about all things related to that. But when you think about building strength, building muscle, staying healthy, we know that in order to build muscle, you have to incorporate recovery. And she was talking about how you have to have both in order to really see gains in the gym, but also maintain a healthy practice for your body and take care of yourself, right? So if we overtrain our bodies or under rest them, then our performance can suffer health-wise. Similarly, if we do not pause after important or focused activities, whether this is in our workday or even in our personal lives, we miss the opportunity for our brains to perform their own rest and recovery in essence. When we take the time to reflect, we are actually forming stronger connections with what it is that we've learned. And so we don't want to miss that opportunity. It's a really important part of growth and living ultimately. So, okay, Eric, to get us started today with this conversation, what are some ways that we could incorporate reflection into our day-to-day and even at work?
There are 5 ways that I want to walk through. There are going to be more that you can find for yourself, but for the sake of today, I want to just share 5 of them. And in many ways, they're somewhat inspired by 2 sources for me, two people and 2 things that have helped me develop more of a habit and a practice to reflecting on different things. So the first is a quote that I've heard John Maxwell say in lots of different places. One, though, in particular, where he really digs into this, is a book that he has called the 15 Invaluable Laws of Growth. And in this book, one of the laws of growth is called the law of reflection. And there's a quote that he says in there, and again, he says it in speeches and other books and whatnot, but he kind of takes this really popular phrase that a lot of us have grown up in hearing and even maybe, think of as helpful, and he kind of turns it on its head. And the phrase that we often hear is that experience is the best teacher. Well, in this case, John basically says, nope, I don't think that's right. I don't think experience is the best teacher. It's evaluated experience that is the best teacher. So with that kind of spirit, he talks about in his book, and in this particular chapter, the law of reflection, he talks about some habits that you can create, some things you can change in your environment just to help you reflect on a variety of things. And he gives some examples of questions you can ask yourself. It's a really good book, wonderful little chapter if anybody wants to go dig a little deeper into that. But for today, we're going to talk about 5 ways that you can reflect in kind of mostly in a work context. So the first one that I want to talk about is just simply reflecting on a day of work. Taking time at the end of a day before you transition into whatever, happens for you after work, whether that's just some personal time, family time, what have you. What does it look like? What could it look like to reflect on that particular day? And in this case, what you might consider is just looking back through your tasks that you worked on, your conversations you had, maybe look at your calendar again if you live a lot by your calendar, and just kind of consider any observations you want to take away from the day, whether it has to do with busyness, whether it has to do with productivity, achievement, whatever is helpful for you. Just kind of pause to just observe. How did the day go? Another thing, though, that I think is really, really great to weave into reflection at the end of a workday in particular, it centers around something we've talked about in other conversations, and that's just simply gratitude. I think it can be really helpful to look back on a day, especially when the day's been hard, and just consider, within the past however many hours I've been working, what's one thing that I can call out that I'm just grateful for? Maybe it's a comment that somebody made to me. Maybe it's that I had the chance to make a simple but helpful or impactful comment to someone else. Maybe it's that I was able to take a 10-minute walk. It could be a lot of different things, but just pausing for a minute and just thinking, well, is there something that I can kind of call attention to from just a gratitude perspective? Mm-hmm. And I know a lot of people who are in the same circles that we're in with professional, personal growth and development. You want to develop, you want to get better. So another thing you can do daily if you want on the reflection side is just to consider, well, what's one thing that maybe I want to do a little differently tomorrow? Because we talked at the beginning about observing the day. What are just some general observations for you? Maybe one of those things could get you pointed in a direction of something you do differently tomorrow. As a quick example, one that I had recently just for myself, I realized that I got a little too sucked in to social media while I was doing a LinkedIn post. And I ended up going down a little rabbit trail that I've realized 30 minutes later, I'm like, I didn't actually intend to spend this much time here. And actually, now I'm a little behind on something else. So something I'm going to do a little differently tomorrow, I'm going to watch the clock a little more intentionally during that type of activity. Super simple, straightforward, but just something that if I hadn't taken time to reflect on the day, I don't know that I would have noticed that I'd spent that extra time doing that. So just taking some time to observe your day, to reflect on your day. So that's the first one. Now the second one is really similar. The second thing or way that you can reflect, I'm going to pull this directly from that second source I alluded to, and this is a planner that I've used for years. The guy who made it, his name is Michael Hyatt, another person I've learned a lot from over the years. He has a planner, or a system of planners, that he calls the Full Focus Planner. And in it, he has built in a way to reflect on not just the day, but also the week. So another way that you can reflect, this second way you can do this, is to think about the week and not just a single day. And you're going to kind of have a similar mindset of reflection here. So I'll give you a few examples of what Hyatt includes in this Full Focus Planner. I think he starts with accomplishments. So you look back at the last 5-ish days, and you just take time to list 3 to 5 accomplishments from the week. Celebrate a little bit. What did you accomplish over the past 3 to 5 days? Another thing that he weaves into the system of Full Focus Planner is the idea that every week you should have, going into the week, you should have a list of your 3 most important things to do that week. You should know before the week begins, and that should help you focus your energy on what is most important. And so at the end of a week during reflection, you're prompted in this planner to think about, how did those 3 things go? How did you actually do on your big 3? How far did you get? So that's another question you can ask from a reflection perspective. Next up, there's this pair of questions that I love to use in a lot of different contexts, one of which is reflecting on the day or a week, which is what worked and what didn't work. Pretty straightforward, but also pretty open-ended. And you just kind of look back at your week and just ask, well, what worked this week? What worked for me? What worked in my favor? What went well? What didn't work? And that kind of leads you into another set of questions that you can use to reflect on in the personal development, but also performance improvement space. In this world of work, we often have a mechanism or a tool we use that's called stop, start, continue. Maybe some of you have heard that phrase, and it's usually a way to reflect on things that you or someone else could stop doing, start doing, or should continue doing. And so this full focus planner gives a similar prompt. It says, as you reflect on the week, as you go into next week, as you think about next week, what are you going to keep doing? What are you going to improve that you're doing? What do you want to start that you're not doing? And then what do you want to stop that you maybe shouldn't be doing, at least for next week? So again, it's all centered around reflection and just thinking about more than one day. You're thinking about 5 or so days here in this question. And then the last thing that I'll tell you, I need this so much, reflecting on a week. There's this just practice of looking backwards at the things that you planned to do, and you wrote down as tasks, and you do what Hyatt calls a list sweep. You're basically saying, all right, well, what did I not do that I intended to do, and do I need to push it into next week, or do I need to delegate it to somebody, or do I need to just let it fall off the list? So this reflecting on your to-dos, in a sense, very practical, very straightforward, but it's something that you need to take time to do. It's not going to happen on accident. So that's the second way that we can consider reflecting. It's not just a day, but the whole week. A similar concept. So those things center around almost kind of productivity, your own plans for the work that you're doing. That's the first and the second example of reflection. The third, though, I want to get maybe a little more specific. This might help with people who have projects they work on in their workplace often, and that is to take time either during a project or especially at the end of a project and stop, kind of look backwards and observe. Reflect on, how did this project go, or how is this project going? You can ask similar questions that we just talked about. What's working, what's not working? What are we going to continue doing? What do we want to stop doing? But this practice of stopping to reflect can really help the success of a project or the success of future projects, because you took time to consider what went well, what do we want to do again for the next project or as we continue this project. So doing it within the context of a project would be the third way that we can all consider reflecting. 2 more simple examples that are similar to the project, and I don't need to kind of go into a lot of detail to give you the idea here, but I know many people, especially the folks that join us in these conversations, they pursue growth. They pursue personal, professional growth and development, and that usually involves some type of training or learning. And so a way that you can intentionally reflect could also be at the end of some type of development system or process or training. So let's say, we have what we call growth groups, where we go through a book with a group of people and we explore questions and we prompt growth, we cause growth on purpose. And this idea of pausing at the end of it to reflect on how it went, how am I better for this? Am I doing things differently now? That is a way to reinforce the growth from the training. Unfortunately, a lot of people and a lot of businesses spend time and money on training, and because there's not really a good process to reflect on it, it almost is a waste, or at least just a very temporary and brief return on that investment, both time and money. Taking time, though, to reflect can really help just double down on the value of, that time and money spent on training. And you'll hear me, I'm emphasizing time on purpose because time is precious, and we don't get it back. So if we can be intentional with reflecting on what we did, that time will have been much better spent. And it's one of those things where the return on the reflection is almost exponential, because it doesn't take a lot of time to reflect, but the value you get out of that is just so great.
Yeah.
So I talked about a couple of big things there, projects, maybe like a training that could have been significant or lasted all day. Well, I want to leave you with the fifth kind of example of reflection and make it really small. I'm going to say sometimes it's really helpful for us to reflect on something as simple as a meeting. Maybe you met with somebody for 20 minutes, 30 minutes, 60 minutes. It can be really helpful to just pause and breathe after that and kind of look back again. That's the practice of reflection, looking back and just asking, how did that go? Was that a good use of everyone's time? Were the right people here? Did we use the time well? Were we planned? Were we prepared? All these simple questions that we can easily just not think to ask ourselves. So this practice of reflection can come up in big and small ways, and it's really just about making it priority. But man, the time it takes to reflect is so worth it because of the value which you can get from the reflection.
Absolutely. That's a lot of great approaches to reflection. You covered a lot of topics within that scope. We know that a lot of the strongest leaders make a regular practice of reflecting. One of my favorite facts about Queen Elizabeth II is, like, at the end of each day she wrote. And I think some people get a little intimidated about this idea of reflecting on your day. They feel pressured to, like, write a novel about it. They think maybe the practice of potentially journaling seems overwhelming, but it doesn't need to be this 2-hour dedication at the end of your day to try to, like, go through every detail of the day. So we don't want that to overwhelm you. I saw the other day they make these great little journals, and I think it's called like a 5 days in a year, or no, 5 years in I'm getting mixed up. Correct me if it comes to your mind. But it's a tiny little journal that's on one page. You can scribble some thoughts about the day, and you can cover it for 5 years in a row. But all it is a short reflection. So something like that,
right.
A tool like that might be helpful so somebody doesn't feel overwhelmed stepping into that space. But why is it that you think more people don't take the time to reflect? I think there may be some common obstacles people run into, but what do you think those are?
The most common obstacle to reflection that I've encountered in coaching and training and the people that we serve here is about time. And in many cases, what that's connected to is the pace that people work. The pace at which you work can be influenced by the culture that you're a part of. If you're an owner, an entrepreneur, or executive leader in a team, you are part of shaping that culture more so than many others. And the pace at which we run ourselves, it doesn't leave the space for reflection in many cases, unfortunately. Now, that's not to say that you have to go slow in order to reflect, but just calling out that many of us have a habit of just running from one thing to another, and that has an impact on whether we feel like we can afford to spend the time reflecting. That's a mental game, though, because some of the highest performers have a pretty insane pace of work, and they build in time to reflect. So it's not kind of like a choose your poison. It's just a mindset. Yeah. So if you're not careful, if you kind of convince yourself that you have so much going on that you can't reflect, that's a trap. So I think that pace is part of it. But related to that is really we have a tendency to schedule ourselves too thin. We don't leave the margin in our schedule, which is why we feel like we can't fit it in. And so the shortfall here is that in many cases, people don't build in the time, commit the time, schedule the time to reflect. So it's a pace thing, but also a scheduling issue. So there's some mindset work to be done for some folks as well. Now, what do you do about that? So those things where the solution is going to sound ridiculously easy, it's going to sound so easy that it's not helpful, or that it doesn't sound like it'll actually do much, but just if you just do this and let me know how it goes, I'm pretty sure it's going to really, really impact you. And the simple answer is Put it on your calendar if you work on the calendar, or build it into your schedule, however you manage your schedule. If you intentionally put in 10 minutes, we'll start there. If you just put in 10 minutes at the end of a day, 30 minutes at the end of a week to reflect on how things went. If you build in 5 minutes of buffer at the end of a meeting, and you want to make sure that you reflect on that meeting, it's simply a matter of setting the time aside. Now, there's a phrase that we won't get into deeply in this conversation, but we sometimes say we don't have the time. Well, I think that I know that we all have the same amount of time. It's just a matter of how are we committing that time. So my challenge to people who feel like they don't have time is to make it. Invest the time somewhere. Put it on your calendar. If you always have meetings pushing you up right to the last minute of your day, well, then there's something you're going to need to change in order to reflect well on your day. But it's just 10 minutes. I'm just telling people to start with 10 minutes. That's pretty accessible. So it's a matter of putting it on your schedule. The second thing I would suggest for people who want to try this, and maybe they haven't had a rhythm or a habit of reflecting, is just find somebody you're close to, maybe a colleague, a peer, family member, friend, and just tell them that you're going to start doing this. And then at the end of a day, share with them one thing from whatever you've reflected on. Maybe you share with them, hey, I took a minute to just look back on the day and I realized, I killed that meeting. I did a great job leading our team and blah, blah, blah. Or, I realized that I interrupt people a lot because I reflected on something. Just share whatever the observation is with someone else. If someone else is aware that it's something you're working on, and especially if they're comfortable checking in on you, then that can be another way to just be intentional and working towards building in some time to reflect in your day.
Yeah. Well, and you both can encourage each other. I mean, your friend or this person that you share these things with might have a similar goal, so you guys can encourage each other in that effort for sure. These are some great strategies. And going back to the gym reference earlier, I mean, it's really a matter of practice, building that muscle, that repetition, getting in the habit of that reflection. It comes more naturally to you. And ultimately, in the long run, it does save you time because you're growing, you're learning through that reflection, just that added practice in your life. So thanks for sharing those. We are appreciative of you guys watching, joining us today. We want to know what suggestions you might have. As Erik mentioned earlier, this is a short list of options, but what are some ways that you guys have incorporated reflection into your own lives? We'd love to hear from you. So thanks again, and we'll see you next time.